Great success is built on the back of 100 failures, and the video game industry is no exception to that. Every week there are dozens of more lone wolves with the next best game idea springing up, and every week there are dozens of these startups calling it quits. So why do we have some going on to release something like Red Orchestra, while others crash and burn, leaving nothing but cinders as proof that they were ever even there? For the answers we need look no further than Chapter 10 of the Business and Production book from the GameDev.net collection. And lucky enough, that's precisely what I'll be reading today, in condensed form of course. My name is Ryan Wienko, and this is Industry Broadcast. Everybody over at GameDev.net for putting this wonderful collection together, reminding our listeners that you can purchase today's book as well as all of the books in the GameDev.net collection simply by going to industrybroadcast.com and checking out the IB Book Club. Finally, a thank you to Mason McCuskey of Cuttlefish Industries for being the contributing author in today's chapter. Lone Wolf Killers. In this great land of game development, I have seen more than my share of death. If I had $1 for every game development team I've seen fail, I could fund the development of Duke Nukem Forever. It's always a sad thing when a group goes down for the count, leaving only a half-baked demo that crashes on startup as the only reminder of their great idea. It's too easy to say that every dead development team died because of lack of dedication. There are many circumstances where all the dedication in the world wouldn't help the situation. By carefully looking at my own experience with now dead development teams, both amateur and professional, in my pro career I've worked on several cancelled titles. I've come up with several ideas about why teams fail and about what can be done to prevent them from dying. I'm presenting these ideas in development order, meaning design comes first, because that's what you do when you're building a game, and implementation comes second. Too many requirements, not enough resources. History has proven that people who think they're invincible are the ones who usually get clobbered. Game development is no different, so it's important to make sure that you keep your head out of the clouds. I'm not saying that you should be forever content with making 2D Space Invader clones. I am saying that you should think about the scope of your game and your own abilities. It's okay to challenge yourself and reach for a couple of features that you're not sure you can do, but in general you shouldn't be completely overwhelmed by your game design. Think realistically about the resources, number of people, tools, and the amount of time you have to work at your disposal, and don't bite off more than you can chew. Also, tasks that are technically easy can still take a lot of time. The fact that it's easy to make one level doesn't mean that it'll be easy to make 10 levels. Numbers have a way of tricking developers into thinking something's easier than it is. Saying this game will have 5 levels with 5 different enemies on each level makes it sound easier than saying this game will have 25 different enemies. Be careful about such things, and be positive that you know for sure what you're dealing with. The I can do anything in a week attitude. Along the same lines, many indie game developers severely underestimate how long something will take, assuming that I can do anything in a week. The vast majority of programmers significantly underestimate how long it will take them to code up a feature. It may not seem very important at first, but if you can accurately estimate how long things will take and then design milestones around those estimates, good things will come to you. Your game will get done, your teammates will respect you, and your team members will have a good reason to feel proud of themselves. Good estimates, however, are very difficult to create. A good rule of thumb is to take your absolute worst-case estimate, double it, and then use that as your best-case estimate. You laugh now, but it's true. Here are some additional tips for making better estimates. There are enough books written on the subject to fill a library, so just do a web search for software project management. But here are a few basic tenets. Break down complex tasks. Say you've got a task like create a renderer. That's huge. Break it down. What features do you need? Particle systems? Okay, maybe a week. But break that one down too. Mesh particles, sprite particles, or both? How do they spawn? Do they collide? Continue breaking down complex tasks until you get an outline full of smaller, easy-to-estimate tasks, and then add up all of the times. A good rule to follow is that no single task should take longer than 3 days. If a task looks like it'll take longer, it can probably be broken down further. Software that creates Gantt charts, like Microsoft Project, can be helpful here. Track your estimates. During development, revisit how long you thought it would take to code that enemy versus how long it actually took. This will ground your future estimations, ideally giving you a scaling factor that you can apply. And of course, conduct postmortems on things fairly often to bring inefficiencies to light. For example, if creating that level took 3 times longer, was it because your editor sucks or is crash-prone? If so, it may be worth fixing that problem to streamline the development of the remaining levels. That's an oversimplified example, but you get the idea. Find similarities in tasks. Relating a task you have to estimate to a task you've already done, or estimated, can give you better estimates. For example, if you have to estimate a task like write an awk tree to speed up rendering, think to yourself, that's a lot like that one time that I had to convert our renderer to using awk trees. What did that take? Now that's an obvious parallel, but you get the idea. Often a task that seems very unique is similar to one that you're more familiar with, and comparing how it's similar, or how it's different, can bring to light subtasks or approaches you hadn't initially considered. Eating dessert first, and the infinite alpha syndrome. Beware of the infinite alpha syndrome. This is where the project, for some reason or another, never manages to progress from alpha to beta, or more rarely from beta to gold. Far more often, it goes like this. An alpha version is made, showing off something cool. 6 months later, another alpha version is made that shows off something else that's cool, but completely different. When asked about the change, the developer says something like, "Yeah, the old code was good, but it was a bear to work with. This new code is much better, much faster, and much cleaner." In effect, the game gets repeatedly rewritten, each time getting faster and cleaner than the last iteration, but never getting any closer to finished. A common cause of the infinite alpha syndrome is that too many developers eat dessert first. That is, too many developers think that game development is all about implementing cool things. They didn't realize that a significant chunk of time on each product needs to go into mundane and less tasty things. In-game menus, saving loading games, resource management, compatibility, scalability, and so on. The game developer ignores these more healthy dishes and insists on eating dessert first. There are quite a few facets of game development that are flat-out boring, technical, complex, and arduous, and these facets do as much or more for the game as the cool technology does. Don't let your development team fill up on the tasty desserts of game development without also paying attention to the more bland but essential staples. Burnout. Burnout is one of the greatest threats to the success of an indie project. All of a sudden, a project that used to be fun to implement is now boring, hopeless, and arduous. Tired team members start to lose passion for the project, and they begin refocusing their efforts on other things. Developers say things like, "This project became too complex. What we need is a really simple diversion game that we can develop in a few weeks so that we can take a break from this project and get back to it later." The sad truth is that 99.9% of the time, developers never return to a project they previously vowed to get back to later. It's important to realize that burnout can never be completely eliminated. Burnout occurs at different times for different teams, but eventually it will happen on your project. However, there are several things that you can do to subdue its effects. Most importantly, don't bite off more than you can chew. The best way to limit burnout is to make sure that by the time it starts to affect your team, you're finished, or nearly finished with the project. Everybody likes to see the light at the end of the tunnel. If the game will soon be completed, team members won't get burned out as easily. Hot and cold. The symptoms of this are easy to spot. Your team members will work on a game for 2 weeks straight without sleep, and then they won't touch it for 2 months. Then after 2 months, they'll work non-stop for another few days. They're impatient, yet oblivious to the fact that they spent so long not doing the game. Hot-cold isn't the same as when your developers work all weekend on a game and then ignore it during the week because they have other priorities, job, school, and so forth. Developer focus doesn't need to be constant day after day to be useful. However, if a developer doesn't touch a project for 2 months and then takes weeks off of work to do nothing but code, that's hot and cold, and that's something to watch out for. Hot-cold developing leads to all sorts of problems. For starters, your team is much more likely to fall victim to burnout. Their attention will drift more easily, the things they produce will appear disjointed, and they may even have problems seeing the big picture. Also, it's hard to re-establish context after you haven't touched something for such a long time, which makes it too easy to slip backwards and redo things you'd forgotten you had already done, going around in circles. The best way to fight hot-cold syndrome is by setting a good example for your team to follow. Stick to deadlines and set realistic goals. Consider starting a blog. Even if it's private, it'll force you to keep context and will provide an excellent way to refresh your memory should you have to set your project aside for a while. This will be very helpful to any new members you pick up midway through the development. Lack of commitment. If you're trying to assemble a team, sooner or later you're going to run into people who are not dedicated but are instead all talk. These people care more about impressing others than they do about getting things done. They're the people who show a small sample of amazing work, but then fail to produce anything else. They often lie about the status of their work using high-tech variants on the dog ate my homework excuse, like my drive crashed and I lost everything, or I accidentally deleted that folder. Learning to recognize and avoid these people is easier said than done. It's very difficult to spot a lie in an email message or in a chat room. And everybody makes mistakes. I've deleted stuff I needed, and I've had hard drives crash on me. Knowing how to discern who's not dedicated to the project is tricky, but it gets easier over time. The people who are dedicated will have produced something, and the people who care less will still be making excuses. After a few months of solid development, you'll be able to separate the people who walk the walk from the people who simply talk. The best way to combat lack of commitment is for your team to brush the non-committed people off to the side of the project. Have them do lower priority tasks with fewer dependencies. Your team should demonstrate through example that people who do the most work are the ones who are trusted when it comes to the big, fun stuff. Don't assign the task of developing your main character animations to the slacker artist. Give him the background animations instead. The nice thing about this system is that the big projects are often also the exciting ones, so team members who work more get to do more fun stuff. And this concludes another great article pulled straight out of the GameDev.net book collection, specifically from the Business and Production book. A reminder to all of our listeners that this, as well as all of the GameDev.net books, can be purchased simply by going to IndustryBroadcast.com and perusing through the IB Book Club at the top left-hand corner of the page. My name is Ryan Wienko, as always signing off from IndustryBroadcast.com, doing my best to bring the collective insight of the gaming industry to your ears.